Okay, so Eternity spends a lot of time talking about her issues of identity and race, and I think the thing we need to these two chapters talk about those aspects. Um, Now, I remember when we first read the book, and she introduces the book to everyone. She says that she warns people that this is going to be an exploration of her and her struggles over the past 4 years. She says that it's not going to be neat, it's not going to be tidy, right? There are going to be some parts of her life that she's going to be ashamed of and questioning why she made those choices. She admits that she's made some bad choices. And I think this is about uh, detailing an experience so that people who have gone through a similar experience can see that they're not alone, but also to help her understand this as a part of her life. I think it's important because even when the book ends, she never says that now I'm cured, now I'm 100%, now I'm a better person. She still says these are the things I still struggle with, these are the issues that I still deal with day to day, and I try to figure out how to become the better version of me. But the idea is to sort of allow us to see her humanity. And also, in an autobiography, if you want people to buy into your story, you got to show people everything. You can't just show them all the good stuff, but you have to show them all the bad stuff, the bad choices, and the bad situations. So the two chapters you're going to be reading are the Visible Bruises and Part A Gastritis. So for Visible Bruises, these are the things I want you to sort of keep into account as you're reading them and think about. So Eternity recounts being in an abusive relationship with her boyfriend Joshua, right? She talks about this in this chapter. Now, this chapter tends to take of all the chapters a more literary or poetic tone in the writing. Not completely. She still uses the true and tried technique of explaining her personal experience and then giving you facts to back up what she's saying. But in this specific situation, it reads more like a poem. It reads more like something you'd see in a book. So I think she's trying to personalize the relationship to get you to understand what she went through and how it's affected her. She makes a connection to love and control, and that was the picture we talked about. She talks about the fact that, her boyfriend comes out, first started off, it was pretty good, but then he's got this aspect of control of her life that she knows she knows that are wrong, but she can't figure it out. You'll notice in the chapter she talks a lot about the fact that she says, I've done the training. I know I used to counsel girls about abusive relationships. I should know better, but she doesn't do that. This is a very important part. I think when people look at issues of sexual abuse and sexual assault, and they see that partners sometimes tend to return to their person who's abused them, the reaction is, well, you should have known better, you should have done better. But it's a complicated situation where she's trying to elaborate, saying that, well, she knows what to do. When you're in the moment, you might make bad decisions that are opposite of those things. He talks about the pain of dealing with her boyfriend's anti-Black racism. Again, he's South Asian, she's Black, and again, this situation comes up again where she identifies that the darkness of your skin color does affect how people treat you. And it was in the South Asian community, as a community that would be defined as a group as part of the POC, which means people of color, that because of issues of race and skin tone, there is this whole idea of self-hating and anti-Blackness, right? The darker you are means the more non-European traits you have. And in society where European traits are valued, the farther away from it, the better you are, right? So it happens within the Black community. You've got people who have darker skin, who have lighter skin, that lighter skin Blacks were treated differently. In certain books, uh, Book of Negroes, I used to teach a book here for grade 12, and they talked about the fact that the slaves that were in the houses were treated better tended to have lighter skin because the idea of lighter skin means more European traits. In France, there were 144 definitions of Blackness. Again, the more European traits you had, the better you were. So that also translates to if you're South Asian, if you are Hispanic or Latin communities, where you might have African traits within those communities if they are darker skin. If you have those things, they're looked down upon, right? So she talks about that feeling that her boyfriend's family doesn't like her because she's Black. Um, She discusses not seeing the signs of him being possessive violent man, and this is on pages 83 to 84 in my digital textbook. It might be the same for you, it might be a little different. And if she played a role in his toxic relationship. So she does something very interesting here. She talks about the fact that, did I do something? And again, I'm not saying that she says I'm responsible for my boyfriend hitting me. I think she does want to discuss the fact that he had a temper and I would stoke his temper, right? To get a response from him because I know he would respond in that way. And am I part of this toxic relationship? Am I feeding into this negative aspect of what's going on? Again, this is not excusing her boyfriend's behavior, his assault and his violence, but it is her saying that if I am part of this toxic relationship and I do nothing to do to remove it, am I feeding into it, right? Are we becoming codependent? That she's dependent upon him being a possessive jerk, and he's dependent upon her for being quote unquote too wild that he has to control. And also this is an aspect, and this deals with, again, issues that she deal with anti-Black racism. Like when it comes to abuse, she faces a stereotype that as a Black woman, she can handle herself and fight back, right? She talks about this in pages 85 to 86, that there's assumption as a Black woman, you're strong and powerful, and therefore you wouldn't get abused or wouldn't take physical abuse because you'd punch them. What was that movie? There was a movie called The Color Purple, and it starred Oprah Winfrey, and she plays a woman whose husband. This is a time, early 20th century America, and men would beat on their wives. And Oprah Winfrey's married to this guy, and his friend tells her, you need to smack your wife around to keep her in line, right? You punch her around to let her know who's boss. Some just hit her without letting her know. The guy tries it, and Oprah Winfrey just beats the crap out of him. That's the idea that we have of Black women in those relationships, that they're too powerful and strong to take abuse, so therefore we don't believe it, right? So when she's assaulted and abused, no one believes her. They think that, why did you take it from him? He's a South Asian man. He's not going to do anything. He's weak. He's tiny. He's effeminate. Don't worry about it. You can handle it. And she deals with this sort of like this idea of people not believing her about her abuse. And the stereotype she thinks, well, should I have stood up to him? Should I have been stronger? Should I have been able to handle it? So it's this, again, this idea that she's got to sort of, deal with this physical abuse and emotional abuse, but also the fact that because she's a Black woman, she's not allowed to process this way. She's supposed to be tougher and more resilient than a white woman. She also discusses the concept of the ideal victim. And again, this is something interesting that I think she draws on. The ideal victim is the belief that we only believe women as victims of violence if they behave in a very specific way, which means they would literally be chased by a man who has assaulted them. The man should be naked, and I'm painting a picture here, while she's naked, screaming, covered in blood, saying, "I've been raped," right? The idea of victim is someone who does everything we expect them to do in those forms of assault, and therefore we believe them. So we do not believe a woman who, people, when Rihanna and Chris Brown got into a fight, people say, well, she probably asked for it. That she's always making those videos, she's always been sexually provocative, she's not acting the way she should be. If he hit her all that time, why didn't she say something about it earlier? She's not acting the way we want her to be. And the concept of the ideal victim doesn't exist, because she even says, I should have known better. I should have been able to know the signs, and I should have been able to move on, but I can't. And I think a lot of times we hear this, especially with young women, when they talk about being in abusive relationships, that they would just cut it off, someone across that line. But it's not. It's more difficult than that. She quotes a lot about the fact that we don't really have data on partner violence. We have data on violence between married people. We have aspects of people being assaulted, violence, sexual violence. But when it comes to young people between a certain age, we don't really study that because we think it's just something that's temporary, not a pattern or situation. So the whole chapter deals with that and how she's got to break up with him and how she sort of leaves him, but how it leaves a scar on her, which leads to the next chapter called Party Gastritis. And it's Party Gastritis does two things here, right? It discusses the party lifestyle and her friend Taz, her and her friend Taz were into. So they go to Weston because they want to go to a party. They're like, it's a party school. And they're both very sheltered young women who grew up in cultures that um, was hyper focused on their sexuality, which meant it was hyper focused on them being good girls, behaving themselves, making sure they don't do anything wild and wrong. So they were constantly being watched. So they want to go to Weston because they feel they gave them the freedom, right? But after Joshua, it affected her. That you notice that she'll say that she talks about how she would choose relationships where men that she both wanted and that she both feared and wanted men, which meant that she wanted to be with men, but she feared that they would hurt her. So she would choose ones that were selfish and emotionally unavailable to protect herself. Right? You're gonna see this later. She talks about her dating her Italian boyfriend. She talks about his reaction being similar to the stuff she's been through with Joshua. That it's not just she dates Joshua, she breaks up with him, it's all over. That those elements of who she chooses and who she falls for, and the idea that she wants someone who's just emotionally unavailable because she thinks they'll give her some form of emotional protection. It doesn't, but that's what she believes. She in this chapter talks about the violence that's directed towards her. So when she goes out, sometimes men are just physically violent with her, or grabbing her, saying rude things to her, making demands on her sexually. It talks about the overall sexualization of Black women, that men just feel they can go up there with Black women and tell her how wild they are, and they say lines that if once you go Black, you never go back, and how that makes her feel that she's not seen as a person, but as a sexual object to be used by these men for some sort of idea of wild sex or conquest. Right? She talks about the difference between her and Taz and their treatment by men. Taz is closer to the more European features and treated better, makes Trinity feel more insecure. So when she goes out, she notices that the type of men that she's getting are guys who are just overtly targeting her, making racist comments, telling about what they're going to do to her. And Taz would get the guys who wouldn't behave that way. So her experience and Taz's experiences tended to sort of differ, where she's getting the attention from the guys who are kind of behaving in a certain positive way. Well, the Trinity's dealing with the guys who are super aggressive, super, threatening to make a move on her no matter what. Um, this causes Taz and her to grow apart, and you see this on these pages, page 110. Um, and also, as she's going through this, she's talking about how her fear of going out is connected to the death of Trayvon Martin and anxiety of being Black in North America. So if you don't know the story about Trayvon Martin was walking through a neighborhood, and a man named George Zimmerman decided that he didn't like him being in his neighborhood and decided to follow him because he felt threatened. He was warned by security not to engage the young man. He still went after him. They got into a fight where he pulled out a gun and shot him. Right? We found that Trayvon had no weapon. He had Skittles, and Trayvon confronted George Zimmerman because he was saying, "You're following me." But because Florida is a crazy state and they have something called stand your ground laws, you can't kill somebody if someone threatens you in a fight. You can use a weapon, you can do that. So it became when George Zimmerman was acquitted for the crime, it made people feel nervous. Barack Obama made a very famous speech where he was almost in tears saying, "That could have been my son," right? A lot of people of color, Black people, felt threatened because it seemed like they were saying, hey, if you're in a neighborhood that you're not supposed to be in and someone has a problem with you, you could end up dead, right? And again, Trayvon Martin continues on to this day where we see Black men in neighborhoods being accosted by people in those neighborhoods because they don't look like they should be there. So it's a fear she's having, right? That as she goes out, am I going to die? Am I going to be in a situation where people are going to accost me or hit me or be violent with me? I think I shouldn't be in this type of bar at London. I shouldn't be around these people in London. Are they going to become violent? Right? The issues of physical and psychological distress, right? She talks about having gastritis. So again, she does a really good job of tying the idea that it's not just about how racism is negative towards society socially. It is, but also the physical and psychological impact it has on her. She's getting sick to her stomach because she has a fear of going out. It is bothering her so much that she's got a psychological fear, but also physical manifestation. She's getting gastritis. She's getting stomach pains. She's feeling tense when she goes out, right? all of her anxieties or all the stress um, uh, chemicals that you release during stress are heightened at a time where you're supposed to be relaxing, right? She's drinking, which means as she gets more stress, she's drinking more and more to try to calm that down, which leads to a very bad pattern, right? You know, she'll talk about her grades slipping because she's super focused on trying to forget or trying to numb her fear of going out to these parties. So I think another general idea that she tries to address is that nightlife is a space for white males and dangerous for anyone else, right? And she does this to pages 113 to 115. She talks about that as a white male, you can go out, get drunk, act a fool, get in the fights. No one's going to think of saying all white males are like that. It's an individual white male who did something stupid. What an idiot. But a person of color cannot act that way. They always have to be on their best behavior because if one of them does it, then all of a sudden it becomes a stereotype, which all becomes an idea that that's a way to approach them all, which might lead to some altercations, right? So if a black guy goes out to a bar and makes a fool of himself and gets violent and does stuff, that means every black man is now becomes a suspect because they believe that that one black man represents all black people, right? So the idea that um, the nightlife becomes somewhere where white men can kind of do and indulge in whatever they want to, but no one else. And she mentions black people specifically, but she talks about whether you're a woman or you are gay or you're trans, that those spaces become very, very dangerous for you because you don't have the same freedom as white males do. She identifies this as an example of white privilege. The behavior of a white person is an individual trait, when the behavior of a POC, which means people of color, is a collective trait, right? So she just says, again, repeating that this is just another example of I have to always be on my best behavior, right? I always have to make sure that I do not do something wrong. I even remember when I was growing up as a kid, I was always told, be on your best behavior, mind your P's and Q's, because if people perceive you as a threat, things could happen badly and it could escalate to situations that you have no control over, right? So um, I think I mentioned this before that one of my shows, Guilty Pleasures, is watching Big Brother. I used to like watching it. I stopped watching it recently because it drove me nuts. And because the two black women were being targeted for eviction, and when the woman who was doing it was mad because she's saying you weren't being nice to me, and the two black women tried to explain why they were angry, and during their explanation, they were getting yelled at and being hand clapped towards. And they all both said, if we don't maintain our calm, we're going to be called the ghetto girls and be targeted, or say we don't know how to behave. So they're dealing with the stress of playing this game where people lie and cheat to get money, but also that they have to behave in a way that upholds black people, because if they don't, they're going to be labeled with this type of stereotype. Oh, look, they're more difficult. They're not team players. Let's target them, right? They become greater targets. Okay, so again, but when you finish this chapter, you find that eternity chooses to distance herself from that life to have some control, and that distance means the end of kind of her friendship with Taz, right? You notice that she says she and Taz kind of don't want to hang out as much. Um, Taz sometimes will go out by herself with a new set of friends, and they'll talk, but now the talking sort of leveled out. But again, it's because Eternity says, look, she loves Taz. They grew apart because Taz could still live a nightlife. And even though Taz gets threatened and Taz goes through some stuff, she feels that Taz's life isn't as much danger or much threat as Eternity's is, which means this is why she tends to fall back. Doesn't mean she stops going to parties, doesn't mean she doesn't want to go to parties. It means that she starts limiting them because she's aware of um, how those spaces aren't necessarily designed for her and that she could be in danger. Okay, so those are the two chapters that you guys have been reading. Those are the two things I want you to focus in on. Does anyone have any questions about any of the stuff I've talked about? Anything you don't understand, a term I used, a phrase I used? If you don't understand it, just please let me explain it to you so you guys know what's going on. So everyone on Zoom, do you guys understand what I was talking about? Or is there a phrase or something that I did not describe in a way that was clear so you guys could understand what I mean by all those terms?
Yes, sir. We do understand. I mean,
Okay,
Yes, sir.
okay, cool. All right. So again, remember, this is a key thing to remember. This is one's about her personal relationship, first chapter, personal relationship. This one about her first relationship with her boyfriend, or with her best friend. But she also interweaves them about what it means to be a woman in North America, but also what does it mean to be a Black woman and the difficulties in all those situations, and how there are layers upon layers of how she has to interact within the world around her. Okay, I'm going to stop this recording.